front line of policing is loud, but the voices behind it, they're a lot louder and I think, frankly, a lot more interesting. Hi, I'm Bob Plaschke, and this is First Response. This is the number one podcast that takes you behind the badge and uncovers real stories and experiences of first responders from all walks of life and the topics that shape public safety today. If you're curious about the guy or the gal behind the hero, and they are indeed truly heroes, and the topics that they care about, take a listen. This is kind of your front row seat to hearing some of the really interesting voices out there, and more importantly, the heroes. This podcast is sponsored by Pepperball, where I have the honor to serve as CEO. Pepperball creates non-lethal alternatives to guns police use to keep themselves and the public safe. Just excited as heck to have Chief Wallentine join me. Chief Wallentine is 40 plus years in public service and serving the community. He is currently the Chief of Police of the West Jordan Police Department. Has been there since 2018. Most interesting to me, or at least most surprising when we were kind of chatting before we started here, is that he comes from a family of 150 plus years of policing. I don't think I've met a family that is blue bloods, Chief, in every respect. Welcome to the podcast. Tell me and tell our listeners, how does one have 150 years of policing experience, so to speak?
Well, thanks for that introduction, Bob. And my kids would tell you we have blue blood, tan blood, green blood, because we've had deputy sheriffs, deputy United States Marshals, one federal agent, my son, a federal agent serving overseas. But it all started with my great grandfather. During the Civil War, or the War of Northern Aggression, for all of your listeners down in the South, and he had occasion to tip back a few drinks with Ulysses S. Grant, and after the war became appointed as a Deputy United States Marshal in Dodge City, Kansas. Ultimately came west and became a Deputy US Marshal here in the territory, now the states of Idaho and Utah. And that just that started us on a roll. We skipped a generation, but as a kid, I lived with my grandfather, who was the town marshal where we lived, and would drove a pickup truck, and often his gun was locked up in a cabinet, and he had a 12-inch thick stick that pretty much ruled the roost in that little town.
Well, you know what? Appreciate that. Appreciate the history of service, and to see that your children are following your way. That's always a good sign. That tells me at least that you've served a good career and have been a good role model. It's interesting. Policing, and I still believe it is a profession. It's a calling, and you see it passed down from generation to generation. Do you still see that from your perspective? I've heard a number of chiefs say that that's a bit of that luster is kind of worn off, and it's not as much of a calling; it's more of a job these days. But what do you see when you're out there?
I do think some of the luster has worn off, but I also think that it's incumbent on us, who are police executives, sheriffs, and directors and chiefs of police, to keep that luster well shine it up, and we do that by picking the right people to be in our departments. We have a 5-word saying in my department that really is the premise of how we treat each other and how we treat the public, and it's "you matter like I matter," and we look out for the humanity among ourselves and in our community. And I think by recruiting officers who have that concept that they are there to serve, because for me it really is a service career. And when you find the officer who is there because she wants to get out there, serve the community, and really help people solve problems, That's what restores the luster. That's what restores the pride and nobility that I felt when I joined the police department many years ago. And I think that's incumbent on all of us. I think we can do it. But sure, Bob, I will admit that we've lost something, but I feel like many out there are trying to regain it.
And I would agree. I think, it's these things are a bit of a pendulum. They kind of swing back and forth to some degree. And I think, I feel like over the last couple of years, the policing the police as an industry, or as a vocation, has started to pick up a bit of momentum. And you know what? Kudos to a lot of police chiefs that have had to deal with a pretty tough decade of public reaction. But I do think it is swinging back, and I think people appreciate what a police agency and a police staff and a police officers do on a day-to-day basis. In that context, how have you seen policing change? I mean, you've seen it over the last 30 years. You've seen it probably good times and bad times. How have you, if you had to describe the last decade or so, how have you seen from your peers, what big changes have you seen in that time frame?
Well, I think we've all got to talk about technology. When I started, we carried revolvers, and some still do. My daughter, that's a deputy sheriff, has inherited my first 6-shot Smith and Wesson revolver, and she's also inherited to pass down to my grandson, who's headed into law enforcement at some point, my 26-inch second growth hickory stick that I use as a baton. We certainly didn't have electronic control devices. I remember the training session where we were introduced to those and learned some of the limitations and some of the abilities of those tools. And now my officers, we live in a community where at least a quarter of the people in our community at the dinner table, they speak a different language other than English. Their first language is something other than English. And we have dozens of languages. My city is home to Utah's largest mosque. And we see folks from Pakistan, from all of the Middle Eastern countries, as well as sub-Saharan African countries. And the amazing thing is, my officers can go up, push a button on their body-worn camera, and translate right there with their body-worn camera. That kind of technology certainly did not exist. We used to get on the phone and call around and see if we could find a French speaker. We had some Spanish speakers. So that has certainly changed. The level of training has, I think, improved, and there's still a great area for us to improve there. When I started, you didn't have to go to the police academy, and I didn't. I had 4 days of training. And at the end of 4 days, the 5th day, we went and bought uniforms, got a badge, went to the city clerk, got sworn in, and the next work day I showed up and I rode around to someone for 2 weeks. And then I was a full-fledged police officer with a 1976 Pontiac Le Mans that still is the fastest police car I was ever in. But I think one of the most significant changes in law enforcement is that our job descriptions have changed. Sure, we are there to serve and protect. We are there to mitigate the threats in the community, but we're also expected today to be mental health caseworkers, to be the front line in a society that has, I don't know how to describe it. I still say that it's a crisis in the world of the mentally ill and the profoundly emotionally disturbed in our community. And when I started that, it just wasn't really much of an issue. And I think the final change that I've seen is the expectation that we have from the community about our police officers. Post COVID, post George Floyd, post many of the influences that we saw in the last 10 years, people expect officers to be almost superhuman in their performance. Unrealistically so, but we still try and meet that expectation.
And that's a great kind of overview of what has, I think, emerged over the last 10 to 20 years. And uh, if I kind of repeating it back, the safety nets that used to be there for whether it be the families themselves or churches or communities, and then the government entities that would manage folks who are in distress. To your point, those safety nets have by and far disappeared, and they've been thrust onto the police and police primarily. I mean, the obviously EMS folks and the fire departments have to deal with it, but they're always the ones called in. The police are the first on the scene to have to engage, and I think it's forced agencies, in a reactive context, to have to try to change their training and change their preparation, and to your point, start to apply tools to bring in technology to try to help in that sense. When you and I let me ask this question: when an officer joins now, do you think they have a full sense of that expectation of that job description, or do they still think of it as protecting, in that context, protecting from bad guys, or do they really begin to understand how much wider the scope is?
I think that most officers, when they join, they do not understand the breadth of the responsibility and expectations that will be placed on them, and don't understand how heavy that mantle is to carry day after day. And it's our responsibility in the profession, whether you're a sergeant. And by the way, I think that sergeants, patrol sergeants, in my world, are the real heroes of policing. They really run the world. You could have a culture either by default or a culture by design. And your patrol sergeants, those are the folks who enforce the culture that you're trying to create. But I think officers come in and they learn bit by bit, and some people fairly quickly figure out this isn't for me, and others embrace that role and say, "Yeah, I can do this. I can be a true servant leader, if you will, in uniform and wear the badge that's." We talk about the origin of the badge going back to the knights and being the knight's shield. And many of our officers, I think they do develop that mindset. I will tell you this, Bob, when I see that in one of my cops, when I see that in one of my officers, my heart just jumps. Um, I love going down the hallway and the floor of our building that houses our patrol unit, and our training folks, and just seeing officers who I know are out there to serve and to protect, and not just in this context of catching bad guys and having shootouts and driving fast.
Uh, and I think that's where I think the tide is turning with the public, because I think there's an acknowledgement and a recognition. This is maybe the benefit of body cams, is that now, my sons tell me about watching body cams on TikTok. Which I find amazing, and that they are they're increasingly empathetic to what situations officers have to deal with. And I think the nature and to the nature of what that officer looks like and what they are, and the kind of expectations is changing. And I think, hopefully, maybe I'm an optimist, hopefully in an increasingly positive way, where people acknowledge that that role is different, and that the empathy they have to have for that officer needs to be different. Right? This is no longer the cop on the sidewalk on a beat. This is someone completely different in that context.
I think that's true. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're providing our officers with the tools that they need to support their own sense of who they are, their own sense of nobility as police officers, and the safety nets, if you will, for them to address the challenges that they had. I think back to a critical incident, gosh, nearly 40 years ago, when afterwards I had no clue what to do, and so I went and banged on some neighbor's house and called the only attorney I knew to meet me at the police station. And when I got to the police station, they took me to the police station and put me in a room. And only after about 45 minutes, when I really had to go to the bathroom, did I find that I was locked in one of our interview and interrogation rooms. And I still can't think about that incident without becoming very emotional. And at the end of the day, when I came back to work after a few days, I remember sitting in the locker room on the floor. There's rows of lockers in this big locker room, and on the floor, uh, just crying because I didn't know how to process what I'd done. And we, oh my gosh, we have done so much better in providing our officers tools to deal with their own challenges. Here in Utah, we have a wonderful program called Safe UT, where officers can put an app on their phone, and 24/7, 365, they can engage in a voice call or a confidential web chat with a licensed clinical social worker that has been trained and experienced in dealing with first responders, police officers, paramedics, firefighters, and so forth. We provide mental health resources within our organization. In our agency, we have yoga programs. Officers can use their phone to do some relaxation techniques, some stress relief techniques. One other major advance that we've seen in public safety is we're teaching our officers about the duty to intercede or the duty to intervene. When we see another officer about to make a consequential mistake, whether it's a use of force or a Fourth Amendment intrusion, a potentially wrongful search, we're teaching officers, you are, in fact, your brother's keeper. And it is your responsibility and part of your oath to step in and help other officers from making mistakes. And that's great to say. And I hear a lot of people say, yeah, you have a duty to intervene. But we've got to teach officers how to do that. And so we've seen some great programs starting in New Orleans. The Ethical Policing is Courageous, the EPIC program, which gave birth to the nationally circulated now ABLE program, Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement. That's a program our agency uses with great success. So we're focusing on giving the officers the emotional and mental tools to not just survive a career as a cop, but to really thrive, to be a whole person. So at the end of the day, they go home and they are the greatest father, mother, husband, wife, parent, and a member of the community that's proud to be a police officer.
And that is absolutely the right goal. And I always try to tell my people that I come in contact with, because the majority of folks that I know personally, in fact, I can't think of anyone I know personally that's involved in law enforcement. And I say, we always have to remember that the person that's walking up to you, after you've been pulled over, they are a father, mother, brother, sister, parent. Their kids are in schools with your kids. It's they are they're just like us, and they're under a tremendous amount of stress and a tremendous amount of they have to live day to day and anxiety, day to day with the notion of potentially not coming home. And so you have to give them a tremendous amount of grace and a tremendous amount of leeway, not in a way that would be, inappropriate, but you just have to appreciate what they're going through. And it's not easy. You were telling me before we started this podcast that your daughter, who's a deputy marshal, you said yesterday on Sunday, what did she text you? Which I thought was, a great example of what police officers deal with. What happened again on Sunday?
Well, first off, I'm grateful she didn't text my wife, but she sent me a text early in the morning that just said, "Dad, I'm okay. Talk later." And I had received a text like that from her many, many years ago, right after a gunfight. And Yeah, that was. I tell you what, you can be involved in a deadly force incident and walk away with some emotion, but when one of your kids, your own daughter's involved in a gunfight, that's a whole different ball of wax. And she and some other deputies yesterday, uh, folks she works with at the sheriff's office, they had responded on a burglary alarm at a gun club. And what you find at gun clubs, you often find guns and ammunition.
Yep.
The suspect was able to get away before they had a perimeter, and they were able to track him down, found the trail, and he had holed up in a car in a campground. Now it's summer here in Utah, just like it is everywhere else, and people were in that campground. This was a very precarious situation, and he was armed with a long range rifle. Uh, Obviously, we know as cops that our vests are not designed to protect against rifle rounds, the calibers that we see in hunting, like a 300 Winchester Magnum or a 270. So they had to deal with him at a standoff distance. And every one of those deputies, I know my daughter was, because we spoke later, but every one of those deputies was mindful of the fact that just last week here in Utah, we lost two very fine police officers to a domestic violence perpetrator who ambushed the officers with a long range hunting rifle. Fortunately, yesterday the negotiations worked. After about an hour, this guy surrendered. Um, but that's the sort of thing, we still police humans with humans. Sometimes people forget, as you said, everybody who walks up to the car, everybody who investigates the burglary or the armed robbery, they are someone's son, daughter, maybe husband, wife, and parent. I think of this over the weekend. The police officers who were killed in a very small town uh, in rural Utah. I think the town has maybe 2,000 residents at most. It was a 16 officer police department, and there were a couple of high school kids did not know these officers, and they high school football kids, and they went out and set up a lemonade stand and were able to collect about a little over $1,000 at a lemonade stand. The county fair was this last weekend. They didn't cancel it, but there was a third deputy who was shot, and his police service dog was shot, and fortunately he was able to be there in the rodeo arena. But to see the response of a small town, everybody in that town turning out, grateful for their police officers. And I just think, how many of you thought to thank a cop before two officers died and left, in each case, families? And in one of them this morning in the newspaper, there was a picture of this officer with his little league team that he coached. The impact is just tremendous. So every time you deal with a police officer, pause and think. Pause and think. What is this officer? What does she or he bring to the table today?
Amen to that. I mean, I think that's I think the policing has done I think to its credit, it's done a great job of being infinitely or significantly more empathetic to the situations they're encountering. I mean, is that the old police chiefs used to tell me it was, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to make you, right? And that was, I guess maybe appropriate if someone's breaking the law, but in the situations that police deal with now, that isn't, you can't do that, and they don't do that. That's a lot more about engaging, listening empathetically, trying to understand the situation the person's in while keeping everyone safe. You want the citizens to have the exact same empathy for the policeman walking up to the police officer walking up to the car. Because to your point, you have no idea what they may have been through that morning or that night or that last week. What is if the old is ask, tell, make? What is the new? What do you train your officers to do now in that context? What's the analogy for that?
I just bristle when I hear ask, tell, make. If I had to simplify it, I would say ask, explain, persuade, direct, and when you have to make. And very often, by using effective communication techniques, by listening. And we have a great training program. It's called Developing and Implementing an Outward Mindset, by teaching officers how to listen for the needs of the other individual and figure out, how do I address this person's needs? How do I get them to do what I need them to do? And how can I help facilitate that process by seeing what their needs are? Much less force is used. We And you're absolutely right. I do remember an instructor 43 years ago telling me, ask, tell, make. And boy, I did that for a long time, and it didn't work so well.
No.
It really didn't. And now we teach officers really to engage in more listening and really treating people like they matter. That's why we say you matter like I matter. And I tell officers all the time, with your body worn camera, you're the producer, you're the director, you're the actor. Ultimately, a jury is likely to be the viewing audience. And so you get to choose what will be recorded for posterity in your actions. And remember this, when you make people angry, when you tell, people don't cooperate. They don't consent. They don't confess. So the worst thing you can do is make, tell.
Amen to that. No, I think it's right. It's not easy though, and that's what my sons tell me. I see the body worn from when people use our technology, use the pepper ball, and I see those probably 3 or 4 times a week, and you gotta I don't know the right word, take a deep breath and really appreciate what these officers have to deal with, because these people, whether they're mentally challenged and having a bad day, they are not. This isn't like talking to your neighbor. It is a hard environment. There's a lot going on around you. There's a lot of noise. There's people videotaping you. It is to your point. You're an actor, but you're like being thrown into a play you didn't want to write. Right? I mean, it's not a play that you wrote, and then you have to figure it out on the run. You have to figure it out in real time. How do you try to respond, and how do you try to deal? On that note, how many hours of training do police officers get per year? I mean, how does that break down? I mean, is it weeks of training? Is it days of training? I mean, I don't think I've ever asked that question.
Well, it depends on a couple of things. First, the state statutory or administrative requirements, and then the agency's commitment and resources. Many states have mandatory continuing education requirements ranging from 12 hours. I've seen 12 hours in a few states, up to 40. It's 40 hours where we're at. And sometimes there are mandatory training subjects such as firearms qualification, de-escalation, those sorts of things. And that, to me, that's the bare minimum. We say every day is a training day. For years, I've been associated with a company called Lexipol that provides daily training bulletins. Officers get training literally every day, 6 minutes at a time, and I don't know how many hours that works out to over the year. And in our agency, we have a few more resources. We're able to do much more training than the 40 hours a year, and able to be pretty responsive to things that we see in the community where we've got a need to address. We can put together a training program. I'll give you an example. Recently, we did training on how to produce a quality body worn camera video, helping officers speak to the camera so that they're creating a record for success, whether it's in prosecution of a criminal case or in defending a civil case because someone says they did something wrong. And we've seen a notable improvement. We were in a good place already, but still seeing a notable improvement in how some of our officers are speaking to the camera, if you will.
You mentioned de-escalation. We talked about that before. Pepper ball is a quote unquote de-escalation tool. But I loved how you talked about de-escalation, and if you wouldn't mind just going back over that topic as we discussed it.
Well, and pepper ball is something we have in our inventory of de-escalation tools, and it's a fabulous option for standoff de-escalation. One thing some people don't understand, Bob, is that a use of force can actually be de-escalation. If we can cause someone to modify their behavior with a chemical irritant, with a pepper ball, uh, in place of shooting and killing them, I'll take that any day. That's a success. But many people think that de-escalation is a tactic. It's not a tactic. It's a goal that officers try very hard to achieve through communication, through other soft skills. It's not a single magic technique. De-escalation is an end state. It's a goal that's dependent on factors that largely involve the subject's behavior. De-escalation isn't something that a cop does to a subject, you know. Really, de-escalation is when an officer recognizes and creates conditions that facilitate the suspect in de-escalating his own aggressive behavior. There's a lot that we have yet to learn about de-escalation, what it really means, and what are the best practices for de-escalation in dynamic circumstances. But at the end of the day, de-escalation always takes a back seat to sound officer safety tactics. We teach officers they've got to have situational control in order to really de-escalate the situation.
Well, I think we're getting near. I got two more questions for you before we finish up. The second to last question for you is if one could go back to 1869 and talk to your I can't know how many greats there are in there.
Grapes.
And what would you think they would say about what you're doing and what your children are doing? What do you think they would? What would come to mind?
Well, first off, I hope there would be pride. My grandson, the son of my daughter, the deputy sheriff, is named for my great grandfather, and I hope that he would be proud of that. But I also hope that he would say, "Yeah, you got some fancy tools," and he'd be so confused by electronic control devices and two-way radios and pepper spray and pepper ball. But I hope he would say, "Well, you're still talking to fellas," and that's, he would go out and go into the wilds to arrest folks on warrants all by himself, put them on the back of a horse and take them literally a day or maybe two to where he turned them into a federal magistrate. And he did that by talking to people. He didn't do it by shooting many. So I would hope, first off, pride, and secondly, I hope he would say, "You're talking to fellas."
And I think that is the essence of policing is talking, right, and then communicating and empathizing, and avoiding the as you say, the telling and the making. And it's the more we talk about policing, frankly, probably the better off we are, and the more that people can understand policing, and that obviously is the purpose of this podcast. Well, that last question for you, Chief, is we'd like to make a small donation in your name. Where can we make a donation for you?
The Utah Law Enforcement Memorial Foundation. It's an organization that I helped start many years ago. We built a beautiful memorial to the fallen officers on the grounds of our state capitol, and now are engaged in a project where local agencies can receive some assistance in erecting smaller memorials for the fallen officers in their organization. So thank you very much. It's important that we remember the sacrifice of those who gave it all so that we could continue to live in a free society.
Absolutely. Amen to that. I appreciate it. I couldn't agree more. For the 150 to 170 officers that die each year in the line of duty, it's only appropriate. It's the least we can do is to make sure that their ultimate sacrifice is acknowledged and recognized, and people, 100 years from now can look back and understand that they paved the way for keeping the keeping our cities and towns safe, and it's the right thing to do. Well, folks, thank you for taking the time. Chief, I don't think I've ever talked to a chief or someone involved who's had 150 years of a legacy of public service. It really is what makes policing, I think, unique. I should say emergency responders. I won't exclude our firefighters out there. But they live a creed, they live a duty, and they see it, and their children see it, and their grandchildren see it. And you know what? If you think about what you'd like to emulate, if you think about your parents and your grandparents, what you want to emulate, that is not a bad thing to emulate, which is serving the public. My name is Bob Plaschke. I am the CEO of Pepperball. This is First Response, kind of a look behind the badge. Thank you for taking the time, and we'll see you on the next go around. Be safe out there.